This episode is sponsored by The Path, the coach-guided membership designed to help you make alcohol small and irrelevant in your life by removing your true desire to grab that next drink. Our science-based, compassion-led program allows you not only to shift your behavior and your relationship around alcohol, but more importantly, uncover and reprogram your subconscious conditioning and neural connections that have been keeping you stuck for years. With daily live breakthrough coaching, an intimate and supportive community, regular peer-to-peer connection calls, and a complete vault of resources, this is where your path to total freedom and effortless enjoyment of your new way of life begins. Join us at nakedmindpath.com. Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to this Naked Mind podcast. I'm here with Casey. Hi, Casey.
Hey, I'm so excited to be here and to see you again.
Yeah, so good to see you too. It's just awesome. So, all right, why don't you sort of take us back to the beginning for you? Where did your journey with alcohol start?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I kind of always loved to drink since the beginning when I started. And I actually didn't start really drinking until the very end of high school or the beginning of college. It was mostly because I went to boarding school. My parents actually lived overseas in South America and Africa. And because they were so far away, I was terrified of getting suspended or expelled from high school. So when everybody else was drinking and doing drugs and all the things, I was an incredibly good girl. Like I was like, if I get kicked out of school, I literally have nowhere to go and my parents are going to kill me. So I just, I was kind of straight A student, did all the things, communicated with my parents sort of once a week on a payphone and saw them a couple times a year, and went off to college and immediately was like, how do I get out of my head? Like, I am no longer scared of being in trouble. I want to make friends. I don't want to constantly, I was sort of hyper vigilant, always feeling like I needed to do everything right. And I felt like drinking just made that all go away. So I got into college and I actually joined the women's rugby team at college, which I don't know if anyone listening knows much about rugby, but it is very ritualized binge drinking that in college was very, very fun for me. But it was the
Casey,
women's.
funny story,
Yeah.
just to interject. All right, so I grew up in Aspen, Colorado, and in Aspen, there's a the Gentlemen of Aspen was the rugby team, and rugby was the only thing anybody in Aspen cared about. I mean, even our high school, didn't play enough football that they had to cancel the football team. People also cared a little bit about hockey, but anyway, the professional rugby team was the Gentlemen of Aspen, and I spent 2 summers being the ball girl because the kicker only wanted like a sand mound. He didn't want to use the plastic thing, so I'd go out, shape the sand. Yeah. So anyway.
That is awesome. So you know all about rugby.
Yes.
And were you invited to any of the parties after the
rugby?
Well,
I was still in high school, so I was invited, but I didn't go. I didn't want to. I was kind of like you, good girl, young.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it was sort of a breeding ground for problematic binge drinking as the goal. And so, I really liked it because I felt like when I was with the rugby team and drinking, anything could happen. And almost like things could be more adventurous than I would be on my own, especially if I got blackout drunk. Like I was like, then I definitely can't sort of stop myself. But, I just kind of did that all through college. I played rugby all 4 years. I still got straight A's. I went to graduate and again felt like, oh my God, I have to find some place to go. Like literally, I will be homeless and have nothing to do if I don't get a job, because my parents were still overseas and everyone else was going home and hanging out with their families and friends. And I was just like, literally, dorm closes, I need a destination. So I got a job in DC and I started working and found my first job, and living on my own really stressful. Like I wanted to do a really good job. I was nervous about it. I worked for a big consulting firm. And I just kind of started drinking wine in my apartment every night and thinking like it was very sophisticated, like no more kegs for me, thanks. I'm going to move to wine now. But the funny thing is, I'd gone to boarding school in college, so I couldn't cook at all. So I would be like eating Lucky Charms with a bottle of red wine, thinking that like I was pretty badass in my, at the age of 22. But your story, Annie, your book, This Naked Mind, actually came out 4 months before I quit drinking 6 years ago. So it was like one of the first ones that was my companion as I was driving around in the early days. And I related to your story so much because I was also a wine girl. I also drank every night. I was sort of a 365 nights a year drinker, no days off. I drank a lot as part of my job. So I worked in consulting, in product management, and in digital marketing at startups and big Fortune 500 companies. So when I was working, we had Beer 30 where like all the new employees would go on a beer run and bring it back on Fridays. We went on a lot of business trips and drank. And it was both a big perk of my job and a way where I bonded with people. You have a late night meeting, you're in the bar, you're talking about the clients, you're recapping about it at the airport. So it was a big part of my life all throughout my life. But when I look back, I was always a drinker. Like I just enjoyed it. I just sort of, as you do, I shifted what I drank as I sort of grew up through the years. So it was no longer kegs, it was going out to the bars. And when it was no longer going out to the bars, when I was living with my husband, it was bottles of wine at the dinner party. And then once I had kids, it was wine at the mommy play dates and, going over to our friends' houses on Friday afternoons after work with our kids and kind of starting the party. So I was always a big drinker. And, what's amazing to me is how much it wasn't noticed or commented on by the people around me. It was just kind of what I did. And I think that my husband and I met when we were in our first job out of college together. We were 22 and I always drank and he drank too. Turns out once I stopped, he was way more of a normie than I was. He was just trying to keep up with me. But, there were a lot of things going for me that kind of kept it off the radar, the degree to which I was drinking and sort of waking up with a hangover every day. So I would basically like come home from work, leave work, pick up my kids from daycare, after school care, get home, open a bottle of wine, 6:30, whenever, sort of drink glasses of wine while I was cooking dinner, helping the kids, doing the dishes. Then I'd get the kids to bed, sit down on the couch, enjoy my 1 hour, hour and a half of alone time, sometimes have to go back to work while doing it, right? Get out the laptop and then finish the bottle. And then sometimes, it would be a Tuesday night and I'd be having a party by myself in my living room, having a great time. And I'd open a second bottle. And, usually the fact that I would drink an entire bottle of wine a night as like the baseline, that somehow was never questioned, which is really crazy now looking back.
Right.
Like that was just like, yeah, that's what's going to happen. My husband would occasionally give me the like side eye and the like, what the hell are you doing, when I'd be opening bottle number 2 on a Tuesday night. And I just be like, what? I just want one more. And, I often passed out on the couch. He couldn't wake me up to take me to bed. So he'd just kind of give up on me and I'd wake up at 3 a.m. on the couch. I would come down in the morning, like weirdly still trying to work out at 5:30 in the morning. But like when I'm grabbing my coffee, I'd sort of hold up bottle number 2 with one eye closed and be like, how much is left? Like, is it 3/4 of the bottle or just like a quarter? Because that would kind of tell me how horrible my day was going to be. I felt kind of shaky. I hated putting on my eye makeup. My eyes were bloodshot and watery and didn't want people looking at me too closely at the bus stop with the kids in the morning, and yet would go to work and hold everything together and be extra smiley and do all the things. And then by 4 o'clock, I'd be like, do I have enough time to grab a bottle of wine between my last meeting and picking up the kids again? And that was kind of how I lived for a long, long time.
Yeah, I can relate to all of that.
Yeah, and it's crazy, like, now that I look back, I can't believe how hard I was making life on myself, like, just, like running a marathon with this ball and chain tied to your ankle.
Yeah.
But at the time, I thought it was normal, and, since learning so much and reading your books and everything, it makes sense that I would desperately want wine and would think it made me feel better, because obviously I was constantly in withdrawal from it
Yeah,
and just had no
exactly.
idea.
Yeah, so true. So what happened next?
Well, I spent a good bit of time doing that, like, back and forth rationalization of, like, I would walk into work in the morning, after dropping my kid at school and be decently hungover, walking into Starbucks, like, I need my breakfast sandwich, I need my latte, with the debate in my head going, do you just abuse alcohol, or do you actually, like, seriously have a problem? Like, are you an alcoholic? Because in my mind, if I just abused it, like, that was way better, because that meant I could just stop abusing it. And it was this daily back and forth, somewhere in between, like, get your shit together. What's wrong with you? Why did you do this again? Do you have a problem? At the same time, while seeing all my coworkers and being like, hey, what's up? How's the fam? It was ridiculous. So I worried about it for a long time and did the back and forth of, like, I'm all the rules, right? I'm only going to have 2 glasses at home. I'm only going to drink when I'm out. I switched from red wine to beer and to white wine because I didn't like it. Switching to boxed wine, bad idea. But I was like, oh, maybe it's the bottle that's the problem. Like, the fact that, you only have a third left, you might as well drink it. So, and then I wasn't able to follow through with any of those rules. And, like, stuff just kept, a lot of the times it was okay, but sometimes it wasn't. I would go out with coworkers in LA and somehow always got to work in the morning, but, was throwing up in the office bathroom, trying to be really quiet, on a work day, on a Thursday, on a business trip, like, stuff that, objectively was not the most professional behavior I've ever seen. Um, and then not remembering stuff. I was sort of the queen of blackouts, like gray outs, like, just my husband would constantly be like, we talked about this. And I would be like, are you messing with me? Because literally my mind is blank. I did a bunch of stuff that I wasn't, they were sort of like a death of a thousand cuts.
Totally.
Like, I my son would be like, "Oh my God, I got $2 from the tooth fairy." And I had put $1 in and completely blanked that out and then put another dollar in, and just, like, literally blank spaces in my mind. And so when he was about 5, I found one of these awesome private secret Facebook groups. I know you've got an amazing group, where people were talking about trying to not drink. And I, was terrified and shaking and shared my story there. And a million women came back and said, oh my God, your story sounds exactly like mine. And you're not a bad person and it's going to be okay. And I hear you and I know it's scary. And it just felt amazing to actually share what was going on with me and to have people tell me that I wasn't bad or wrong or crazy. And this was when he was 5 years old, my son. And so one of the women in the group, who was sort of around my age and cool and lived in Seattle like I did, was 4 months alcohol free, and she was going to AA. So she invited me to go with her. And I was sort of like, bucket list. Okay. Never thought I'd do this. I went with her and everybody was very nice. And it was eye-opening. It was stuff that I, had never really seen talked about before. And I went for about 4 months. I was like, all right, let's give this a go. And it turns out it was just not my path. Like, it works for so many people, and I have so many friends who do it. But for me, um, the mantras, the big book, all the things, it didn't resonate with me. And it actually made me sort of rebel against it quite a bit. I hated feeling like I needed to say I was an alcoholic. I have quit drinking 6 years ago. I'm actually a sober coach and have a podcast, and I do not call myself an alcoholic. Um, I find for me it's very unhelpful, and I don't even know what that means or if it's true, but it doesn't help me to think about it at all. Um, so I ended up backing away from AA and got pregnant with my daughter. And then as soon as she was born, was like, oh, I can drink again. It was entirely situational, right? Like it was my boss and my husband and my job and life. And it definitely was not the alcohol that brought me to that place. So started out with like, I just want to have a glass of wine every couple days on a date night with my husband. I would say within a week, I brought a bottle home for a Friday night. Within 2 weeks, I was back to wine every night. And within a month, I was back to a bottle of wine a night. And it actually took me 22 months to stop drinking again after I started. And the entire time I knew it was a problem. Like, once you start doing this work, every time you're hungover, every time you don't remember stuff, every time you're shaky, it's because of the alcohol. And yet I sort of was in that place where I knew the way I was drinking was unsustainable and I was going to have to stop. Like I'd gotten past the point of like, oh, this is manageable, but I just didn't want to stop yet. Like I was like, I could probably drink for a couple more years before I actually need to stop. And then, for 22 months, I sort of went between this is no big deal, or I like it, or I don't want to stop today, to this is awful and I feel like shit and I have to stop now, but I can't. Or I just don't have the willpower. And then I woke up at 3 a.m. one day, like no different than any other day. And someone had posted in some group about another day one. And someone in the comments mentioned working with a sober coach. And I had the anxiety and the I can't fall back to sleep and I hate myself and this sucks. And I went into work that day and signed up with her for a 100-day challenge. And at that time, I could not get more than 4 days. Like it was just, I would go 4 days, drink a bottle of wine, 4 days, drink a bottle of wine. And that was me like working really hard at it. But that was my last day one. And that was 6 years ago.
Oh, congratulations. That's so awesome, Casey.
Thank you.
I love that. I want to go back to a few things that you talked about. First of all, was when you were thinking, okay, if I just abuse alcohol, like that's okay because I can stop. But if I'm an alcoholic, that's not okay. I want to understand like what was in that.
Well, literally my worst case scenario was never being able to drink again. Like that was the absolute worst case scenario. And I very, very consciously was like, I need to get a handle on my drinking so that I never have to stop, because I loved it so much. Like literally, it was my favorite thing in the whole world. And my husband would say to me, when I was, having glass number 3 of wine on a Monday, he would be like, why do you keep drinking when you feel good? And I was just like, I just never want this feeling to end. Like, I just felt like if I just kept drinking, it would go on longer, which of course now we know, yeah, it doesn't. and it makes it worse. And you're not going to remember it anyway. And, all the things, but it was just that feeling. And so even though I kept waking up just feeling like total garbage, I kept feeling shaky, I kept hating myself, I had that metallic taste in my mouth, I kept being like, I just need to figure out the right ratio of how much to drink. Like, what's the sweet spot that if I can keep it at that, then I can keep it in my life and still get those hits. But, I thought if I'm an alcoholic, that means I can't ever drink again. Mm-hmm. And so like that was the worst case scenario. And what I figured out was that like I could have saved myself so much torture, mental torture, physical torture, pushing, hating myself, because once I stopped drinking completely versus trying to moderate, I felt so much better. And it was amazing. And I think it was the label of also being an alcoholic that kept me from stopping drinking for the longest time. And you've talked about this, the stigma associated with it, as opposed to a positive health choice that anyone could choose to make at any time.
Yeah, it's so true. So I want to talk more about like when you started again after a break and sort of what was going through your mind and how the 22 months.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say that for me, it was a couple things, in when I stopped that time when my son was 5, I was sort of at an emotional breaking point. I was, kind of fighting with my husband a lot, which we actually don't really fight. Um, and I couldn't remember what we fought about in the morning. Like he'd be like, okay, I told you I wouldn't do this anymore. And I was so upset, but I actually couldn't remember my argument and what it was due to the drinking. So I was sort of not totally happy in my relationship, but I felt like I wasn't clear enough to get a handle on it. Like I couldn't piece that apart from knowing that I was drinking too much.
Yeah.
I was really stressed out at work and kind of like unable to cope. And again, I couldn't piece out what was working at a startup, what was working crazy hours, what was my boss versus drinking too much. I was pretty unhappy and I couldn't, I was like, why am I angry? Why am I unhappy? My life should be pretty good. Nice husband, beautiful kid, enough money, good job. And yet kind of going through each day thinking like I would sit there and like the phrase that would come to mind when things would happen was, I want to shoot myself like 5 times a day, and I'm just like, all right, this is messed up. And so I went to a counselor for anxiety, but also made sure he had a specialty in addiction, right? And said, okay, I want to talk to you about my boss, my job, my husband, my life. And by the way, I drink a bottle of wine a night. And he said, all right, let's talk about your drinking. And I was like, no, you didn't hear me. Listen to, this story about my boss. And he was like, yeah, let's talk about your drinking. So that was when he was 5. And so I did take a big break because I worked with my therapist. I went to AA. I posted in the group. I was like, okay, I need to get a handle on this. And then I felt better, right? I was like, I'm happier. My marriage is better. My health is better. I'm not anxious. And I said, I feel so good. And I think a lot of people do this. So I can go back to drinking now because I'm so much better. Not putting together that like I felt so good because I wasn't drinking,
Right.
like that was why. And so when I went back to drinking again, one, I figured out that, stopping was not easy. It was sort of the idea of I took a year off, I can stop again whenever I want. And once I started drinking again, I was like, yikes, this is not easy. I can't get more than 4 days without going back and forth and saying, forget it. But also it brought me back down to that same really low emotional point where I felt like I couldn't cope, where I was going around going, oh, I want to shoot myself. But that time I knew it was the alcohol. I knew it wasn't situational. I knew it wasn't my job or my boss or my husband, because I'd been there before. And so that time I was like, oh, it's the wine,
And so from that realization, did it still take you quite a long time to sign up with the sober coach?
Yes and no. I mean, I honestly didn't really know a sober coach was out there because I'd been to AA before. And this was 6 years ago. So there weren't as many programs. Like your book had just come out. So there wasn't like, I feel like it's amazing now that like you've got the alcohol experiment and you've got the path and you've got all these programs. At the time, there was some amazing quit lit groups and some awesome online Facebook groups, and the Instagram group wasn't really out there as much. And so 9 years ago, it was AA kind of or nothing. And 6 years ago when I stopped, it was sort of just the very beginning of being like, "Oh, there's sober coaches." And so I had thought when I was trying to stop on my own, I don't wanna go back to AA, that wasn't for me. So I'm just gonna try to do this through pure willpower. And that was not working either. And I really needed to flip my thinking about it. And your book helped me so much with that in like, hey, it's not me, it's the substance, it's the alcohol that's the problem. And you don't need to be an alcoholic to decide that this is not doing for you what you think it's doing for you.
Yeah.
That, everything we have been told in our lives that alcohol brings to us, looking at it objectively, it's not true. And so when I stopped drinking, I did reach out to the coach and I emailed her every day, honestly, for like 2 years. Like my initial goal was 100 days. And, in the beginning, it was just like, all right, it's day 16. All right, it's day 22. I'm going out to dinner with my husband. What am I going to order? What am I going to say to the other couple? My kids screaming, I want a drink. What am I going to do instead? But then it was doing all the other work around like my beliefs about how being a red wine girl tied into my personality. I mean, I don't know
Mhm.
if you experienced this, but I was actually scared that people at work would find out that I stopped drinking because I thought they wouldn't promote me if they knew I didn't drink, which is crazy, right? I
That's
was
so
like
interesting.
doing so
Yeah.
much of a better job than when I was like grayed out or hungover.
Yeah. I did not have that experience because I was in charge of my department. So
Oh,
like there
good.
was no promotions to be had. But I do remember it being bumpy and people giving me grief about it. And
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people tell me that they're afraid that their career won't progress or won't be able to progress because of that. In fact, my cousin, who now doesn't drink anymore, but at the time she was working for someone who actually she owned two, I won't say what the company is, everybody would know it, but she was second in command at this company. And the CEO also owned a winery. And
Mhm.
so she would literally stop drinking except for times she had to go out with her boss, the CEO, and just
Mhm.
drink just then because she was very afraid that it would be problematic. So I completely understand. I just dove in and told people, and they were weird, but well,
Yeah. I ended up telling everyone around me that I was doing a 100-day no alcohol health challenge, like my coworkers, my boss, my girlfriends, my husband. I didn't tell him anything more than that. And I needed to do that because there was no chance that someone was going to not notice that I wasn't drinking. Like I always drank, there was no like, I'm doing an early morning workout or I'm on antibiotics. Like they would basically think I was pregnant, which I also thought would not be great. So it was one or the other.
that makes sense. So then with the sober coach, I am curious, like what do you think it was that shifted? Was it accountability? Was it just knowing someone's checking in?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was definitely accountability for sure. But what I think it was just showing me like the next step on the ladder. So I needed to not think about forever. I needed to not think about forever, never again. But the issues for me were like, all right, it's 6 p.m. on a Tuesday night, and my daughter was 2 when I quit drinking. She's screaming, and my husband's out of baseball practice. What do I do? Like, I really want to drink. And just kind of keeping me in that moment and being like, all right, what else can you do? Can you bring in more help? Can you go take a bath? Can you find childcare for different periods of the day, just almost giving me a push to take better care of myself. And the reminder that I was doing this for myself, that I had decided I wasn't drinking so that that was off the table, as opposed to when you're in your own head, it's so easy to back out of it, just to be like, this
Yeah.
was a silly idea. I feel like once you commit to someone or to a program, you're like, oh, yikes. Nobody does that if it's really no big deal at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that so much. So, Since I know you have, two, I guess, kind of final questions in your story. First of all, can you tell people where to find you? Should they be interested in your podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hellosomedaycoaching.com/podcast, or you can just go anywhere you listen to podcasts and search for the Hello Someday podcast. And I am so excited because Annie is my guest for my 100th episode that's coming out
Yes.
pretty soon. It might already be out by the time this airs. So it was totally an honor to have you on.
And it was such a fun one. We had a good time. So it's so awesome. And then Casey, let me ask you what I always finish up with, which is if you could go back to, Casey of, especially I think, because it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that those 22 months of kind of that in between, because there was no blinders on anymore. And I'm sure would you say that your desire was more to stop during those 22 months than it was before?
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
So if you could go back to her and tell her what life is like now, what would you say?
I think I would tell her that it's way better. And I thought it was going to be worse. I thought that I would miss drinking for the rest of my life and I would just feel deprived and like, something that I loved so much was taken away from me. And instead, I've found that my world has opened up so much and actually become more fun and more adventurous. And I've met more people not drinking. Like my world has actually it was pretty small when I was drinking. I did the same things. I fell asleep early. I felt like crap in the morning. I saw the same people. I had the same conversations. I had the same debate in my head. And once I stopped drinking, it's like this explosion of personal growth and transformation and opening. So yeah, I think I tell her that it's way more fun than you think it is, and you're not going to miss it.
I love that so much. It's almost like, the first step to really building the life that I always wanted happened on the other side of that, because that first step was really obscured. Because bad news flash, but that first step can be kind of painful, and we're obscuring that pain. But it's in like allowing ourselves to actually feel what life feels like, that those feelings can kind of guide us and help us navigate to the places we need to actually solve stuff or own stuff or take responsibility for our own existence. And it was all for me very much like so much texture and richness opened up after that because of that. Not numb anymore. So, all right, I got to show up for myself. What does that actually look like?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I actually miss those early, I went back and sort of looked through pictures of my first year, and it was such a time of awakening. Like it felt so real and in technicolor. And you had all these revelations in that first year that I don't miss the hard parts at all, but I do miss like just that period where you felt like everything was opening up, it was all so new. It's kind of cool. It's a really special time.
It is. It really is. And it does. Yeah, I agree with you. Like there's nostalgia for the early days in some ways, because it is just like
maybe after the first month.
Wow. There's some very, a hard time sleeping, some anxiety, but once you get through, I'd say the first few weeks, it's like, wow, it's really interesting. I love that. It's so great. Well, thank you so much, Casey. It was so fun to have you on and chat again and hear your story, get to know you better.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Are you ready to make instant changes to your drinking? The answer is not in restriction or deprivation, and no, you don't need more self-control. I'm here to tell you that you can break your patterns and habits and finally feel liberated from alcohol. You can return to a life where alcohol is small and irrelevant for you, a non-issue, take it or leave it. In fact, I have 3 secrets to control your drinking, and I'm going to teach them all live in a special 3-day virtual event from March 28th through the 30th. Learn these 3 secrets to control your drinking and make changes instantly live with us. Save your spot today at controlalcohollive.com. I can't wait to see you there. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, as it truly helps the message reach somebody who might need to hear it today.